Namaskar, everyone. Today we have the last of the interviews, last but not the least, with one of the most amazing, dynamic young woman entrepreneur from the erstwhile royal family of Mayurbhanj, Akshita Bhanja Deo. Akshita has studied in Calcutta and then she's gone to study she's a David Scholar from the Bard College in America. And she has studied political science. With a special emphasis, political science and human rights, with concentrating in media in conflict areas. She has also gone on to work with an organization which focused on Syrian refugee crisis. She returned to her hometown, her home in Mayurbhanj, the Belgadia Palace, and she is the director of the 200-year-old Belgadia Palace in Mayurbhanj. And very importantly, she's working with her family to make the region more sustainable as an arts and craft destination, as a tourism site, highlighting the importance of the crafts communities there. Also, keeping in mind that a large portion of the region comprises of the indigenous people from that area. So, welcome, Akshita. Welcome, and looking forward to hear you. And so the first question, of course, is do share with us any memories you have of a museum, your own, anywhere you visited in the world, and that's how you want your museum to be, or do you have any such plans?
So the first memory I have from museum was probably visiting the museums in Calcutta, and then later visiting the museums in New York, um, and as well as Singapore. Singapore was much more interesting because I think it was the first time you went to a cosmopolitan city in Asia, which sort of paid homage to the different communities that had come and settled there, whether they were Chinese, whether they were Indian. Um, and where they were Malay. And so it was very interesting to understand how a cosmopolitan city was able to capture its culture and heritage, and why that was so important in a contemporary age when so many of our urban cities look the same. Um, and when I went to New York, I was kind of blown away with the museums, whether it was the Met, whether it was Guggenheim or the Whitney Museum, and then specific museums down, built to showcase South Asian heritage. And I felt that museums were, what I noticed was in museums in Europe and North America that they were curated in such a beautiful manner, even though they showcased a lot of Asian history and African history and South American history. So I felt that there was a sense of, um, they were being able to cater to different audiences and segments. It didn't always have to be about that specific continent's history, because it spoke of a larger cultural fabric that was seen in melting in places, in melting pots of culture. And that was my first memories of museums, just being this beautiful space. And I was someone who was a very visual learner, so to be able to go to spaces and learn things to touch, feel, smell, even cafes which sort of showcased culinary history, those were really interesting to me, to be able to understand where we come from and the lessons we can learn from the past.
That's very interesting because when you come back to India, when you come back to your home, you've worked in other places, other parts of India, but the palace, that itself looks like a museum. When you've seen the rest of the world, you realize it even more, right? That
Yeah.
so coming to the next question, which is a very important question, since you've also worked with refugee humanitarian crisis, and you're concentrating on a very different aspect of humanity that is a very important concern of 21st century, is as a woman entrepreneur, as a woman who is from the Mayurbhanj region, from the erstwhile royal family, and how do you plan? Do you connect? Do people see you differently? Do they treat you differently?
No, not at all.
No, that's very good.
No, I think because there was, I mean, I've I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think I'm very privileged, and I've always been able to, my parents have always inculcated the sense of recognizing the privilege and having a lot of gratitude and humility. Um, to answer the question of whether people treat me differently in Mayurbhanj, no. I think that they appreciate what I've been able to do um, on my own, whether that's taking, forming partnerships, and building coalitions to, whether it's about conservation and and my role in the Simli forest fires. I think people have a sense. I mean, people. Um, I think my parents, they treat them differently because I feel like they've seen my parents have a whole, you know, um, close to 50 years of having worked in this space. I think that you have to earn respect. I don't think it's handed down to you. So I think there is a vast, I have a lot more to do to be able to. Um, I think people appreciate that you're trying to do something, but to a level where you're treated differently because of being from a certain family, I think at least in Mayurbhanj, you have to earn that respect and that adoration, because there's already a sense of, you had the privilege of being able to have the best of education opportunities, the best of livelihood opportunities, and so what you bring to the table is really important because um, and I'm always grateful to people for having really leveling the playing field and speaking to me in a manner where there was always more that I could do, and and yeah, I think that also, for me, was important to not actually come back to Mayubhanj out of a sense of responsibility of someone told me to do that. I think it was a choice. I'm blessed to be. I always say I'm blessed to be born in paradise and to belong to paradise. So I was just really lucky. I've been a girl who grew up on Amar Chitra Katha and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and I'm like almost fascinated by mythology and folklore, and my idea of so much comes from mythological stories in our epics. And then to be born in a family like this, I'm just lucky. I mean, if I can, my mission would be to be able to change people's perspectives on heritage towns and districts like Mayurbhanj. And if I'm being able to contribute to that in any degree, where youth growing up here are aware of their history and heritage and what was being able to be achieved in this region, and they can come back and make a difference, I think that's all I could ask for.
That's very interesting how what you're bringing in, and you're realizing where you come from. You're very well aware that you'll get your education and your practical knowledge and skills into reaching out to people, connecting them. So can you just elaborate further on that? Like, you mentioned that you want to, your family is working towards sustainable tourism. What exactly does it mean? And
Yeah,
when you see Mayurbhanj on a global platform, how do you present Mayurbhanj to people? Like,
that's a good
it's
question. So I think that what we realized was, what you need to take the best of what the region and the state had to offer. And for me, there was just a blueprint that was handed down to us from our ancestors, because they had already had very strong documentation in the past 200 years, about, for example, whether it was artist patronage. So it gave birth to the idea of artist residencies. There were already marked areas for where tourists should go and visit, because we had tourism in a sense in the state always, right? Because sense of hospitality. Where was industrialization possible? Where could we be better on healthcare? Where could we be better on education? I mean, it was almost like a blueprint of a smart city. It was just up to me and my sister to start beginning that process of bringing it back. um, Monarchy didn't exist in a vacuum. It was a subject of its times. So of course, there's so much that has to be, we have to be able to build on and make better. But if something existed which brought the community together and was able to achieve a certain, milestone, I think that should be brought to the fore. Whether that's sustainability, whether that's circular fashion, whether that's being able to protect, artisans from from what the challenges the disorganized sector faces. I mean, that's great. That there's There are always ways to push that forward. And I think my ancestors believed in, conservation and sustainability. Of course, those aren't the terminology they used 200 years ago, but you see that with their practices. So I being an academic and having an academic bent of mind, it was very important to me to go through the libraries and research scholars and read about the history of the state, not just from what the British perspective was, but through indigenous storytelling, which is mostly in oral folklore, or whether it's through women writers, or whether it was through visiting foreign dignitaries who weren't British, because their perspective was different on what the state was able to achieve. And in terms of what my family aimed to do was they wanted to restore Belgaria, our ancestral home from the 18th century, built by one of our female rulers, Maharani Sumitra Devi, and actually open up the Mayurbhanj Foundation side by side. So what ends up happening is a percentage of funds from guests coming in visiting Belgaria actually goes directly into the Mayurbhanj Foundation, which has an aim to reach a certain number of youth in the next 5 years in the sectors of healthcare, arts and culture, sports, education, and sanitation, which was we thought was important in the past 2 years especially. So it was important for us when people came to Bulgaria, they experienced Mayurbhanj, the growth of Bulgaria and Mayurbhanj went hand in hand. And we were able to actually move the needle on changing our low development indicators. We had to run Bulgaria almost as a travel startup where guests can come, be made aware of, whether that's arts and culture or, be able to be aware of community practices, to change the storytelling narrative. Second, actually be able to invest in artist clusters, give workshops to youth, do volunteer trips. And third was, the dream is to actually be a point of contact for any visiting organizations, institutions, and individuals who want to invest in Mayurbhanj. So you become a point of contact. I mean, it's similar to what our states do, right? You have Invest Maharashtra, Invest Orissa, you have these conclaves, Invest Bengal. And that's what erstwhile royalty did as well. You come to my state and let me show you what's great about it and its people, and you invest in their ideas and entrepreneurship and talent. And I think that descendants of royal families have so much of an advantage to be able to reach back into the annals of history and take out what worked for a larger public and community, regardless of caste, creed, race, gender, and update what worked to a modern day telling. And when you said earlier what you've been able to bring, is the idea in my family was that no matter who you were, you went abroad, you studied different subjects, and or you had the opportunity to study from the best and with the best minds of the world. And you're being able to bring back that practical knowledge and those networks to come and benefit your state. Because look at the access of networks that erstwhile royal families have, whether it's jewelers and car makers, or whether it's elected representatives and social activists and reformers. So you have to be able to be an ambassador for your region and being able to bring back the best of the talent and the best minds in the world to solve really modern day issues, because you're not going to be able to do everything at once, but you can definitely you're just in my head it's like being an amplifying messages, being a microphone, and doing it in a way where you're not sort of putting a veil over what doesn't work, but you're being very honest in terms of this is who we are and what we do and what we can do, and this is where we need some support to be able to reach certain really pioneering efforts.
So, which brings us to the next question. When you're saying your generation, the descendants, what you bring in. So, how do you see social media? How has it helped you? Not helped you?
I mean, I personally think it's really benefited us because, I don't want to exist within history pages and museums. People talk about royalty as if they're in sepia toned photographs you find in now designer stores and pillowcases, or whatever else that is, and you see these unnamed faces, and they just kind of become these markers of stereotypes and labels and caricatures, to be honest. And we read a lot of British history growing up. That's how we saw princely India, was through the eyes of mostly colonizers. And so most people don't realize, they don't realize that princely India existed. It predates the British, it predates the Mughal era, it predates a lot of South Asian dynasties, and actually goes, some families go back to their origin stories wrapped up with the origin story of our greatest epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana. So if we have to take a much more academic viewing of what is princely India and what did they really do to strengthen the fabric of our nation. And we need to ask more from these families, because they are privy to a certain respect in communities, and largely 60 to 80% of India lives outside of urban capital. So as much as you want to talk about democracy in a new modern India, you have to realize what is the roots of India, how is it formed, how is trust formed in communities outside of cities, and can these palaces and families actually be platforms rather than properties or institutions. And so I believe that for my generation, social media has been great, because you have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to show people that it's not about the Rolls Royces and the designer. That's just a blip in history. If you're considering a family was been there for 1,000 years, 10 years of them shopping once or twice in Europe is really not what's going to define their legacy. So let's look beyond that now, more from these families, who stretch between pop culture and policy. That's a very grand level of influence you had. So in talking about social media, I mean, these are the original influencers. They literally influence
Exactly.
to think about handlooms and handicrafts, and Maharani so and so was able to bring back chiffon. She brought chiffon saris to this central stage, or whether someone brought about a certain weave, or someone protected a dying art and craft from the 4th century, or whether they set in policies for healthcare, or the abolition of parda or sati. I mean, these reformist movements happened because of people. Governments are formed because of people. And so I think that especially for a young India, who is very well aware of democratic standards and what they deserve and not, um, you should, we should read more into who gave us, the India that exists today, um, who sort of formed this India, who was instrumental in forming this India. Because if you don't know your past, you don't really know where your future is heading to. I kind of feel like you have to stand for something, otherwise you kind of fall for everything. So I think it's important, and like I said, an academic lens. It's not black and white. There's a gray. No one's asking for absolute monarchy, but to brush it away would be a very this is the last generation who has the ability to speak to their ancestors, who were alive when their fathers or they themselves signed the instrument of accession, who formed the Chamber of Princes, who were there during princely privy purses
Privy
and
purses,
emergency.
yeah.
So, I think it's important to be able to ask them hard questions about what was their imagining of India, and are we living that today? And, who are the guardians of democracy? Because there were certain things that were promised and certain things that were meant to go a certain way. So I think that, like I said, I'm just lucky. I'm a student of history. So I consider myself, like I said, my Instagram bio is a storyteller and tour guide. So I think a lot of, because the way I see it is it's someone who's, through their eyes, you can see, um, the restoration of whether it's a palace or, it's just someone's home. You can always connect with that emotion. Someone has to connect with your emotions, right? Of whether it's struggle or challenges or what you want to achieve.
And restoration of something doesn't necessarily mean to make it look like something bright and brand new. But restoration means you're going back to those sustainable practices that were there. So if it's a lime plaster building, you have to actually hunt
Mm,
for a craftsman who still remembers how to work with lime plaster.
yeah.
And when you hunt
Yeah.
for that one person, he'll need a team. So he ends up training more people. So that's like a chain thing that happens. And now different kinds of ecosystems that existed come up, right? Even in terms of cuisine. So
Correct.
different times of the year, you would make things that grew just then. Now we have the same fruits and the same vegetables the whole year round. So we've forgotten, the importance of it. Which brings us to the question of, please tell us about, especially with arts and crafts, like, I know that you work with the Dokra crafts people, with textile clusters, and do mention the fires. I've read about it, but maybe our audience doesn't know.
Yeah. So what we started, so my sister, we all sort of have our roles within the family of what we're doing for what we call the brand House of Mayurbhanj. So I'm the director of experiences and partnerships, which means that I look for experiences that can kind of speak on Mayurbhanj and, like you said, have equity and story and sort of giving back at the center of it, which means you have to make your production line sustainable as well. And for that, what we try to do is we take our guests to actually go see artist clusters. And during COVID, the artisan um, comes over to the house where we work with Dokra artists from the region, predominantly clusters that have the erstwhile state work with as well. Sabai is a contemporary art form which we take our guests to, and actually we started our sustainable line called Hasa Atelier, which provides marketing access to Sabai grass clusters to be able to take bigger orders. And which means also we try to work with groups in the state to lobby for GI tags or lobby for more skill development and capacity building and skilling, because that's the end game. We try to work with interns who can come, design interns, textile interns who can come and work with the craftsmen to be able to actually see what are ways they can be inspired, because these are our future generations of designers. And we always try to find different artist clusters we can work with. And when I say work with, it's not just identifying an artist cluster, but actually seeing who has the potential for skill building, for capacity building. We have to run Belgadia as a startup and almost with corporate values, because the idea isn't to run a charity. The idea is to be able to make sure that when you leave and exit a space, that village is self-sustained and can, like you said, be able to train more people, have
Yeah,
more
it's the
avenues.
business enterprise, right? Why do we have to always think of
Craft,
an NGO
exactly.
charity model?
Correct. We believe that like craft and commerce goes hand in hand, because that's what we saw succeeded from the erstwhile state to present day times. What succeeded was clusters where there was a certain level of commerce attached to the cottage industries that were formed. Um, so we look at and even training, so looking at actually quality of the craftsmen, which ones are able to be learn new designs. And what we try to do is not always start the wheel, which is what we try to do is find nonprofits who are already working in the space. So for example, we work with Project Chowni, who's reviving the dying martial arts folk dance of Mayubhanj. So every time a guest comes, they have a chow performance for the guest. We try to make sure that if there's a guest who actually wants to learn Mayurbhanj chow, that can be done as well with the ustads. My job is to make sure that as many events or organizations can host performances, chow is introduced to them as something our dancers can go across India and abroad to actually be able to let people know about this dance and art form. And we invite as many dancers to actually come here and actually be inspired by Belgadia to maybe do more choreographies. The Chau Pavitra happens in April, where there are two dancing schools, the Uttar Sahi and Dakshin Sahi, who actually compete. One is backed by the Maharaja, one by the Maharani. So age old traditions like this which bring communities together, we do that and try to keep a social message during these festivals, whether that's about sanitation or healthcare or bringing an aspect which makes it more than just a community festival. Apart from that, we also, if there is a nonprofit who's working in the district that we can help in any way by giving them marketing platforms, bringing guests to them. So for example, we're working with a textile school that is actually reviving the lost art of Tasar silk weaving and its specific weaves and motifs. So we're working with them to see how we can bring in the ecotourism angle, where guests can go visit the school, have meals there, purchase from them. And then of course the idea is always to bring back Mayurbhanj onto the circuit of the craft and design circuit, which are largely missing in East India, unlike in Rajasthan and Gujarat, where they set places, massive foreign buyers go and place orders. So but we always try to do that in tangent with, like I say, elected representatives, so these become not just tourism excursions by one institution, but can actually lead to policy change. That's what matters in the end. There has to be a macro and micro goal. Apart from that, what we did was, for example, we're taking part in the saffron art auction, of course, with 200 million artists and creative dignity. And then last year we also we're part of the initiative called the Karkhana Chronicles, whereby different palaces, forts, and museums across India, had textile installations for the public, as well as to mainly provide a livelihood to their artisan clusters, which had been associated with the palace for many years. And it was amazing to have, a state like Mysore, which pioneered, just khadi and spoke about the beauty of the fabric of khadi and its history and reviving clusters in Mysore for that. Then to seeing a place like Kathiwara, which is, had beautiful installations by Maharani Sangeeta Kathiwara, and being able to showcase, the indigenous craft and design there, which was stunning. From the beadwork to the fabric of the loincloth they used. It was just, and I think we need to have more mainstream publications talk about indigenous design, weaves, drapes, which are being lost. So this is just in 2 years, a few things we've been able to do. Um, and when we had COVID relief partners such as Youth Feed India or Creative Dignity, we were trying to go back to artist clusters, whether it's Dokra or Sabai, or Blackstone carving, or even and being able to give them ration, to make sure that artists realize that there is a space for them, with the administration taking care of them. So we always look out. We're always on the lookout for more artisan clusters. And my mother in 2019 hosted an arts and culture festival open to the public, where we had stalls for different artists of different groups to actually for people to visit Bulgaria and then see these artisan groups. We have our own in-house boutique store called Beej, which houses a lot of the crafts from different clusters. So at least when a guest comes to Bulgaria, they are able to see even very briefly what is available here. We try to source a lot of our spices and food from the local heart and from the Orissa group, which sources tribal spices and food from across Orissa. Boinica, of course, is, if for those unfamiliar, Boinica is actually a store which is 2 minutes from the Belgadia Palace, where different handlooms of Orissa is stored there. So, when a guest makes a pit stop here, you are experiencing the microcosm that the East and Orissa has to offer, whether that's through our handlooms, handicrafts, dances, even our food, spices, what is, and it's a very important point, the culinary history of our state, and our region, to eat, I just recently discovered what a major breakthrough it is to experience the palate your ancestors had. You should feel so grateful that there are indigenous groups that have protected these grains of rice and spices and are actually able to explain to you, like you said, what was grown and eaten at a specific time. To have the same thali your ancestors had is, you're very, very lucky. There's nothing that I can think of that's more circular and sustainable than that, because they go along with the season, best agricultural practices. And I think that there's so much indigenous knowledge that we've been able to learn in the past 2-3 years, and being able to replicate that. And I think through our handicrafts and handlooms, it tells the story of your region. So I'm not telling you, I'm showcasing, whether it's craftsmanship or innovation or sustainability. One grain of rice or one thread and weave is able to do much more. And for me, I think the larger objective was to change the narrative of places such as Mayurbhanj, largely found in the east, northeast, and some parts of the south, where it's just not on the tourist map and not on the national mainstream gaze. We need to start thinking of innovation and entrepreneurship existing outside of urban cities. And, the languages that we speak, especially of museums, Polimi, you had mentioned, who do we build museums for? So it was important for me that Santali youth come into Bulgaria and see their Phuta Jhala sari, which was made in collaboration with Lipsa Hembram, who herself was from the indigenous community from Mayurbhanj, at display in Bulgaria. Because this is closer to what my ancestors wore than, something from the West. So it was, if we can, I think stories matter, they become part of the human experience. And I feel, one thing that's important to say is every family has a story. And my parents always said that we're all descendants of, princes and paupers. So this is not about the royal story. It's about the story of the community. My family just exists as a prism to what the community of Mayurbhanj is. It goes in hand. We don't exist in a vacuum.
So like you said, if it's the story, the narrative, the chronicles of Mayurbhanj, then you see yourself as kind of a sutradhar, a narrator. And you don't see yourself, as the central, like the glamorized if I may say, the Hindi film versions that one gets to see of royalty, where you're just sitting in, in this royal chamber and you're just giving orders and shouting at people.
That's the stereotype that was put. That's the caricature we're trying to break. I
Yeah.
mean, and if you just look at TV shows like The Crown have done more to make the British royal family relevant than anything they've done politically in the last 10 years, I would say. Because I believe that, I mean, there's a reason why Diana is more popular than a lot of other royal family members who are heads of states of, present day states in the Commonwealth. And that's because they recognized human emotions need to be connected, they need to have a resonance with what you're doing. And I feel like the mainstream media portrayals of erstwhile royal families have done more harm than good, and we need to take these families and individuals a lot more seriously in the value they add. So you have to let people in, you have to be inclusive, and that's always what these states were about. So I think that I mean, those were the parallels you can draw being a millennial who's traveled the world. Because I actually, Polmi, you mentioned, you said, but Aksa, you're an insider. And actually, I think the reason why I have this lens is because I looked at myself as an outsider. So I was able to be like, I'm an outsider who has insider access. So now what's the story that I'm going to tell?
It's wonderful to talk to you, and especially to learn that for the audiences, is that what is portrayed to us as royalty and exclusiveness and our birthright is actually something that's a very contested and challenged field every single moment of your existence. And the fact that
Yes.
you're able to realize, you and your sister are able to realize, and you're able to do so much, and the best thing is that you're planning for the future in advance. You're sort of for you, arts and crafts is not something that's fancy, and it's something you buy once in a while and store somewhere, and then that's it, it ends. It's actually part of a much bigger multiple ecosystems and networks. And would love to talk to you, see you soon, and have a longer, more detailed conversation. But right now, thank you so much for taking out time, and best of luck to you, best of luck to your sister, and to see the amazing work that you do. And thank you for your uh, involvement with 200 million, the auction, and it's happening right now. So we are all keeping our fingers crossed to see how the outcome is. And thank you, everyone, the audience. Thank you so much for being with us. Namaskar. See you soon. Bye.
Thank
See
you
you,
so much for
Akshita.
me.
Thank
Bye.
you.
See you.
Bye. See you.